This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. Over the course of the hour, we'll run through the latest stories making headlines across economics and business across the continent. But first, a quick run through the markets. Carnage, really, is the only word that we can use to track what's happening across the markets that we're tracking on the program today. South Africa's top 40 index over 1,700 points lower at 1 point. Sasol, the synthetic fuel maker, Standard Bank, First Rand Bank, all down by over 7%. Absa shares, in fact, are down by over 10%. At 1 point. In East Africa, 62.8 million shares of Safaricom were traded, with that counter closing about 2.7% higher. They had risen by about 4% early in the session. That's the highest it's been in about 6 months, according to Bloomberg data. Here's what's coming up tonight. The new variant of coronavirus identified in South Africa is now classified by the WHO as a variant of concern. We'll look at an app that is helping retailers navigate market challenges on TechSpot. And 3 students in Nigeria have developed a robotic dog that should imitate a real one fairly closely. Robotics and tech, of course, we have content on that coming up in the course of the hour. But let's start off with the coronavirus pandemic. Concerns continue to loom over the new coronavirus variant B11529 detected in South Africa. That has seen the European Union, the UK and India announce stricter border controls as scientists sought to determine if the mutation is vaccine resistant. In the last few minutes, the WHO has also essentially described this particular variant as one of concern. The UK has also banned flights from South Africa and neighbouring countries, and it has requested British travellers returning from there to get into quarantine. The World Health Organization has been holding meetings in Geneva with experts discussing the risks it presents and if it should be designated as a variant of interest or a variant of concern.
One thing that we know about variants is that they don't only need to emerge, they also need to be amplified by super spreading events, and that normally so everyone that gets infected with the same virus start transmitting and have the numbers to transmit to the population. And that it is at the moment what we should be focusing on, not really on the origin of the variants. We will never know if they originate in South Africa, a neighboring country, or someone that arrived by plane.
While the team of scientists will be studying and giving us further information over the weekend, will be more empowered. But of course, we are saying that from the experience of the last 21 months or so, we almost can predict how this is going to move. As I've said, especially when, like the Delta starting in Gauteng, you can be rest assured as people start to move even more over the next few weeks, this will be all over.
All right, then, so let's dig a little deeper into what exactly is going on here. Dr. Mary Stevens is a technical officer at the World Health Organization. She joins us now live on the program. Dr. Stevens, thank you for your time this evening. So the South African scientists are reporting that this variant, B11529, now essentially named Omicron, given that particular name by the WHO, it has over 30 mutations in it. Viruses mutate all the time, but walk us through why this is a source of concern.
Thank you for having me, and good evening to you. Yes, this is concerning for us, and both in Africa and of course globally, because this is the virus that has the highest number of mutations so far, even higher than what we have seen with the Delta variant. So the concern is the transmissibility, potential transmissibility of the virus, which is currently being investigated, and whether or not this virus evades immunity. Because if this happens, then it becomes a very, very big problem, especially for us in Africa, where the vaccination coverage is still very, very low. We are still about 7.3% of the Africa population that are fully vaccinated. So it means we have a very large pool of susceptible population. And if we have this situation and with a virus that is highly transmissible, then it's going to become a problem. So that is why it's of concern to us in Africa.
how will we be able to assess the risks that are posed by this particular variant in terms of how much more transmissible it is and how, of course, it responds to the vaccines that we have at the moment, or even therapies that we're using like monoclonal antibodies? How much time do scientists need to figure that out?
Yeah, so it will take a bit of time. The researchers are working on it to try to understand the characteristics of the virus and also the effect or impact on immunity and the vaccines and the transmissibility. So as you know, the cases were recently just reported to WHO on the 24th of November, both from Botswana and South Africa. So the researchers are still working on it, and we will continue to see. So far, some of the cases that they have seen are presenting with mild symptoms, and given the fact that some of them are already fully vaccinated, but it's too early to say. We have to continue to wait for the evidence to come out, and there we can say, but while we are waiting for the researchers to do more work on this, we need to make sure that we are implementing preventive measures to stop or prevent or mitigate the risks of spread. And we can do this by making sure that we are ramping up the vaccination campaign. In addition to that, the simple public health and social measures do work. So the issue of individuals wearing their face masks, avoiding unnecessary mass gathering, hand hygiene, keeping their distance away, that will also work in trying to limit the spread of the virus across in cities and, of course, across the continent.
Now that it has been designated as a variant of concern, what does that imply from a health policy perspective for governments here in Africa?
Yeah, for governments in Africa, it's that this is a virus that has the potential to cause havoc. And what needs to happen is to make sure that we are working and watching it very closely. Continue to do the genomic surveillance and ramp it up as much as possible where we can in countries that have this very strong capacity. And secondly, ensuring that we are ready. We shouldn't wait until we see what happened, like what we saw in India, manifesting before we start acting. No, we need to make sure that we have the capacity to respond, potential capacity to expand care for patients, as well as human resource capacity that will care for these patients, laboratory capacity for surveillance, testing, and dictating these cases as well, and of course, rapid contact tracing of these cases. So in addition to this general population, we have to comply with our preventive measures while the government makes effort to ramp up vaccination campaigns. So with this, we will be working towards mitigating the impact while the researchers continue their work on helping us understand better the characteristics of this virus.
Indeed. From a medical policy perspective, the WHO has argued often that travel restrictions are not a policy they would recommend as a response to the emergence of these new variants. And the Delta variant is essentially, the fact that it's spread around the world is essentially pointed to, especially in debates at the moment, as one example of why travel bans really don't work. But walk us through the logic that the WHO is applying in making this recommendation.
Okay, so the foundation of our response and prevention of international spread of diseases lies in the international health regulations that all member states worldwide have signed to. And the goal is to prevent international spread of diseases while avoiding unnecessary interference with international trade or travel. So instead of closing borders, there are other options. What WHO is advising is applying risk-based approach to international travel. We have seen the devastating impact of what these travel restrictions and closure of the economy has had during this COVID pandemic, right from 2020 to date. And there are other viable alternatives that countries can use without closing their borders. This is the issue of testing. All countries in Africa require pre-departure testing. So if you're traveling, let's say from Brazzaville to Rwanda, you will need to present a negative PCR test. And countries can do this In addition to that, if they are not very much comfortable, they can still add a quarantine, for instance, instead of completely closing the border, so that at least we have some level of activities happening while we are mitigating the risk of spread of these viruses and the variants that continue to evolve.
Indeed. Dr. Mary Stevens, the Technical Officer with the World Health Organization, joining us on the line there from Brazzaville. Thank you. Now, the World Health Organization, as you've just heard there, they're cautioning countries of imposing travel restrictions linked to the B.1.1.529 variant of COVID-19, now essentially named as the Omicron variant. It adds that the countries should be taking a risk-based and scientific approach to dealing with this new variant.
Early analysis show that this variant has a large number of mutations that require and will undergo further study. It will take a few weeks for us to understand what impact this variant has. Researchers are working to understand more about the mutations and what they potentially mean for how transmissible or virulent this variant is, and how they may impact our diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. This variant, the B.1.1.529, was reported at a remarkable speed. And it is important to note that every travel measures should be always weighed, and that countries can do a lot already in terms of surveillance and sequencing, and work together with affected countries or globally to work scientifically to fight this variant and to understand more about it so that we know how to go about. So at this point, again, implementing travel measures is being cautioned against, and taking a risk-based and a scientific approach.
The United Kingdom, however, has already announced that it will temporarily ban flights from a whole host of countries in Southern Africa. That includes South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Lesotho and Eswatini from 1200 GMT on Friday. Now, returning British travellers from those destinations will have to get into quarantine. The EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen says that the European Union is also working to halt air travel from the region. On Friday, Japan also tightened border controls for visitors from South Africa and 5 other African nations. Hong Kong has identified 2 cases among arrivals from South Africa. All right, then, so let's stay with these developments. Angela Coppola joins us now live from Johannesburg. Angela, from the scientists on your end of the world, what more do we know about the Omicron variant, as it's being called now by the WHO? What more do we know about it, its mutations, that has scientists concerned?
Well, the big issue is that the scientists here, and there are some 100 of them that have got involved in doing the research and analysis, started looking at this variant seriously from Tuesday. So it's still early days. They don't have a clear understanding of what the variant is capable of. For instance, it's not yet clear how transmissible it is. You heard that earlier. And whether it's virulent or as virulent as the other variants are or not. We do know that the current test that can pick up this variant in certain circumstances, but we don't know if that test is foolproof. So we're going to have to wait and see if it does catch all instances of the new variant. Tests are being done in many labs nationally to determine the spread of the infection, and preliminary evidence is suggesting that it's spreading and there is an increase in case rates, and it's becoming far more evident. We've now seen the data that's just been released by the NICD, and it puts it at about 2,800 new cases overnight. Last night it was at around 1,500. The day before that it was closer to 200. So it seems like the vaccines are effective in fact, but the data pool is still too small to get excited. We have just, as you mentioned, learnt that the WHO has designated the variant as a variant of concern, and that means a whole different set of protocols are going to be followed, Ramah.
Right, so the UK, Belgium, Israel, they've imposed flight restrictions of one sort or another. The EU essentially planning to follow suit as well. Given South Africa's prior experience dealing with being red-listed before, how do authorities in Pretoria plan to deal with these changes?
Well, that's the $9 billion question, isn't it? That's what it cost the country's tourism sector in lost business in 2020 and a similar amount in 2021. Authorities didn't have a plan during the last red listing. They simply lobbied the UK authorities once their scientists had sat down in virtual networks and groups and talked to each other from both countries and sorted the problem out and tried to understand what the data was and wasn't showing them. The data then did the talking, and the UK lifted the restriction then. Even with that restriction in place, there were some UK tourists who did come into South Africa and vice versa, but of course had to go into quarantine. The health minister doesn't have a plan other than investigating the variant and finding out what it can and can't do. We will get a clearer picture of that plan, if there is any, on Sunday. That's after the Corona Command Council meeting and possibly an address from the President, Cyril Ramaphosa. Ramah?
Indeed, that's going to be an interesting one to watch for over the weekend. One last question for you, Angelo. Is there a sense, though, especially among South Africa's scientists and medical researchers, that the country is being unfairly targeted here? Because you've got a world-class genomics group that identified the variant, they're honest about the findings and very public about it, and then the next thing you know, the country's being slapped with a flight ban. But we're not seeing similar measures being imposed against Israel or Hong Kong or Belgium.
Well, we were briefed by the South African Health Minister, Joe Patla, a little while ago, and he was in a fighting mood, to say the least. He wondered aloud why the UK and those other countries in the EU had reacted in such a knee-jerk manner, as he put it, when the UK infection rates and positivity rates are far higher than South Africa's experienced. So it's not useful or helpful, and that's according to the Department of Health Acting Director General, who in the same briefing told us that the UK didn't even bother communicating the decision officially to South African authorities. It came via WhatsApp from the British High Commission in Johannesburg at 10 o'clock last night. On fair treatment and flight bans, well, only one case was reported in Belgium. But on the other hand, it is part of the EU, so I'm not going to get drawn into any conclusions in that regard, Ramah.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Angela Coppola live in Johannesburg. Now, at the same time, China is speeding up its development of COVID-19 antiviral drugs. So far, clinical trials of these antibody drugs have been pretty effective, considerably reducing hospitalization and mortality rates as well. Zhou Jiexin has the details.
Neutralizing antibody drugs will soon become another medical weapon in the fight against COVID-19. A wonder drug discovered by one of the leading Chinese research teams could now reduce hospitalizations and mortality by 78%. They call it cocktail therapy, developed by selecting two monoclonal antibodies that inhibit the virus from infecting healthy cells.
The cocktail antibodies can target different sides of the virus, even it is mutated. They're broadly neutralizing antibodies. We've also modified the antibodies to extend their half-lives. After one shot, the cocktail can exist in the human body for about 9 to 12 months.
While being reviewed by Chinese regulators, the therapy has already seen compassionate use in more than 800 COVID-19 patients across the country.
The impressive safety and efficacy profile from clinical trials has supported the emergency use status granted by the National Health Commission and the Ministry of Science and Technology. So we're very confident of obtaining full approval soon.
Researchers from Peking University have also discovered what they call a single super antibody.
How super it is? If it's highly more potent, we can use less. Okay, so it's at least 1/3 of the price of the previous pairs. But most importantly, it will not be escaped. You just take one shot, and that will take care of a month or 2 or 3.
Their neutralizing antibody medicines has proven to be effective against all current variants and has already seen compassionate use in Beijing. While researchers are keen on these biological macromolecular drugs that can also be used for prevention purposes, Chinese pharmaceutical companies are pushing to test small molecular compound drugs in clinical trials.
I think both of them should be pushed. Small molecule drugs are highly promising because of their ease of use at a large scale. Usually, they have more side effects than the antibody because antibodies are natural. But that will need to be proved through the safety test.
Clinical trials in China for COVID drugs could be slower given China's effective control measures and lack of sufficient patients. Then they would have to undergo trials overseas. But experts say that once authorized, COVID drugs will complement vaccines in efforts to beat the pandemic. Zhou Jiexin, CGTN, Beijing.
All right, and a quick run through some corporate headlines. Let's start in the world of transport. Airline shares tumbled That's putting it mildly. On Friday, after several European and Asian countries announced new travel restrictions for Southern Africa because of a new COVID variant. The Bloomberg EMA Airlines Index was down by as much as 12%, the biggest decline since March 2020. British Airways parent firm IAG was down 11% in London. Lufthansa, Ryanair and Air France KLM all registered drops of a similar magnitude. The European Commission recommended a pause on travel between the EU and Southern Africa. B2Gold Corporation, it's a Canadian company that owns mines in Africa and the Philippines, has announced plans to acquire gold assets in Zimbabwe. The mid-tier gold producer weighed buying an idled Zimbabwean gold mine some 2 years ago, but it wanted authorities to exempt it from a law that forces miners to sell all the metal to a unit of the country's central bank. Climate activists targeted 15 Amazon depots across Europe on Black Friday. The world's biggest e-commerce company also faced protests by workers and delivery drivers in Germany, France and Italy. Amazon is coming under quite a withering storm of criticism from climate activists who say that excessive consumption harms the environment. On the other hand, an alliance of trade unions says the company does not pay workers enough, nor does it pay enough tax to governments. And finally, Bayern Munich says its turnover for the 2020-2021 fiscal year was just over $717 million. That's a pretty sharp decrease from pre-COVID levels of more than $840 million. The German Bundesliga champions for the last 9 seasons, Bayern won 6 major titles in 2020. They're leading the season's Bundesliga title race. They've actually qualified for the Champions League knockout stages as well. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. China issues a white paper on partnership with economies here in Africa. We'll have the details. And thousands of graduates from Tunisian universities are protesting a lack of employment opportunities in the North African economy.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
the front line. Within clear view of this front line position.
Welcome back to the program. China has issued a white paper on its relationship with economies here in Africa. It's titled China and Africa in a New Era, Partnership of Equals. This document is detailing past experiences and how similar aims and goals have brought both sides closer. CGTN's Iran has the details.
This is the first white paper China has released on overall cooperation between China and Africa. It's also the first white paper that details cooperative achievements between China and another region.
The white paper says Africa's foreign aid from China between 2013 and 2018 totaled 217 billion RMB. From 2000 to 2020, China helped African countries build more than 13,000 kilometers of roads and railway. After the COVID-19 pandemic struck Africa, China offered 120 batches of test chemicals, protective gears, masks, and ventilators to 53 African countries.
The 8th Ministerial Conference of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation is to be held in Dakar. In these times of crisis, China and Africa's meeting shows the mutual trust and support between the two sides.
Entering a new era, Chinese President Xi Jinping has put forward the principles of China's Africa policy. The white paper elaborates on these principles and details the pursuit of shared interest between the two sides.
The core part of this kind of relationship is to respect each other and equally treat each other equally and to share their development and the fruits. Looking forward, the future development of both sides, China will put more investment in the area of infrastructure building in Africa and try to help the African countries to build their free trade areas. Furthermore, I think China and Africa will try to strengthen their cooperation in the new area, for example, the energy, the green energy area, the digital technical area, and even the out space, right, area.
China-Africa relations are in its prime. Since 2015 and 2018 summits of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, 10 major projects and 8 major initiatives of economic development and trade were adopted. More areas of cooperation ranging from social development to culture, science to poverty reduction are being raised to new levels. Biran, CGTN, Beijing.
Tens of thousands of Tunisian university graduates who have remained unemployed for more than 10 years are escalating protests in the country. The move follows an announcement by the government to halt plans to carry out a mass recruitment exercise which had been approved by lawmakers. CGTN's Adin Chouachi has the latest from Tunis.
Tunisian president has accused the former ruling majority and members of the frozen parliament of lying to the unemployed graduates. President Kais Saied said those who passed the unrealistic recruitment law, commonly referred to as Law Number 38, maneuvered and pretended that the indebted state could hire more people.
I have held a meeting with a group of unemployed youth and graduates who've remained jobless for many years. We discussed this law, which was put in place in August 13th, 2020. It's a state law, but everyone should know that this law was adopted in that period to contain anger and not to be applied or to employ anyone.
Basma Rizgani is leading this protest movement in Tunisia. She's an unemployed university graduate and a widow. In a defiant but respectful tone, the representative of jobless degree holders said the declarations and the decisions of the head of state will not stop the social unrest in the country.
We call on Mr. President to reconsider his decisions. Refusing to apply the law number 38 of 2020 will plunge the country into a very dangerous situation with unknown consequences and social unrest. We're the elite, but we are fed up. How does the president close the door to desperate people who do not have any hope for the future, with this unique chance of getting hired after 15 to 20 years of joblessness? This is unacceptable.
Tunisia's Employment and Vocational Training Minister, however, said the government will adopt a new approach to activating the unemployed. The authorities will also involve those who are furthest from labor in developing a new state employment strategy.
The president informed the unemployed youths that the public service can no longer recruit new civil servants. The administration is under pressure and cannot hire more people. The president said that unlike those who lied to the unemployed, he will not make empty promises or sell any fake dreams or hopes. The president urged the government to find a comprehensive and effective solutions to the unemployment problem.
The head of state had previously pledged to recruit young university graduates who have been unemployed for more than 10 years in community companies that will be financed from stolen money recovered by the state. Protesters have described the recruitment in community companies as an illusory solution to the unemployment problem in the absence of prosecutions against businessmen involved in corruption cases. The representatives of unemployed graduates say that Law Number 38 of August 2020 was adopted after a series of sit-ins, protests and strikes. Activists have said that the non-application of this exceptional recruitment law will have repercussions on social peace in Tunisia. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
South Africa will not renew temporary permits of around 250,000 Zimbabweans who are working in the country when those visas expire in December. That's according to Mondli Gumbele, a minister in President Cyril Ramaphosa's office. Some 250,000 Zimbabweans fleeing political and economic crisis at home were granted some 4-year work visas back in 2009. Now, the visas have been repeatedly extended, but the South African government has announced there will be no further extension. The workers have been given a year's grace period, however, to apply for alternative visas that may be applicable to individual situations. Thousands of Zimbabweans work in South Africa, especially in hospitality, retail and the service sector. Mr. Ramaphosa's government is under pressure to create job opportunities for its citizens as the ballooning unemployment rate has gone over 34%. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. We'll have this week's edition of Tech Spot. We'll be looking at an app that's bridging the gap between retailers and clients.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Welcome back. It's 18:30 GMT. These are some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Days after he went to the battlefield, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has announced the recapture of important locations from TPLF. Mr. Abiy says that he won't back down until the rebels are no longer able to threaten the freedom and sovereignty of Ethiopia. Elsewhere, Burkina Faso's President Rochmark Kabore has promised to end the dysfunction within the military in a speech on Thursday night. This comes as the nation braced for even more protests against worsening insecurity. 3 Burkina Faso soldiers died, 11 militants were also killed during an attack on troops on Wednesday. That's the latest of 3 attacks since the 14th of November that have killed over 60 security forces and more than a dozen civilians. China Media Group and 36 African media partners have signed a joint declaration designed to deepen cooperation and amplify African and Chinese voices on a global stage. The declaration was the culmination of the Our Africa Partners CMG Media Corporation Forum, held both online and offline in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. And finally, in East Africa, teen mothers in Tanzania who had been stopped from going back to class are now being allowed back in school, in a huge policy shift by President Samia Suluhu Hassan's administration. The previous decision to ban pregnant schoolgirls from continuing with their education by the government of then President John Pombe Magufuli was widely criticized by human rights groups and international donors. That's a run through your company headlines. Let's now cross over to my colleague Uche Okoronkwo for this edition of Tech Spot.
Hi there and welcome to Tech Spot, where we sniff out the groundbreaking new concepts in technology disrupting traditional sectors. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and this week we're eyeballing digital solutions that are reinventing informal retail in Africa. Now, like many Africans, I mostly rely on my small and informal local shop daily. The fact is, on the continent, 80% of household retail is delivered via informal retailers. Despite their importance, these informal shops have remained mostly disconnected, not just from formal supply chains, but also from Africa's digital revolution. Now, a company called Soko Watch, Soko being the Swahili word for market, has created an app that acts as a digital marketplace for these small shops, and it is delivering tailor-made solutions for them. While today we'll show you how digital solutions may have become a lifeline for informal traders. A typical African morning. As we get up and start the day, local kiosks are already up bright and early, stocking their shelves, ready to provide the essentials to the communities that rely on them. But the reality on the back end for the millions of informal economy traders is the daily struggle to overcome demand and supply challenges for fast-moving consumer goods. Before COVID-19, distribution systems for these shops were already virtually non-existent. Most shopkeepers had to close their shops and travel to central markets to buy goods from wholesalers, making them vulnerable to price increases and limiting their access to essential products. And with no real access to financial services, that meant restocking their shelves was costly and time-consuming. For the customer, products are frequently out of stock, and when available, it's often at a higher price. Supply chain disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic have only made it worse. At the height of the pandemic in 2020, a survey by Geneva-based think tank Impact Initiatives found that 53% of Africa's informal retailers reported an increase in the prices of items. 46% saw a decrease in demand for commodities. As a result, 449 said they had to close shop between March and June 2020. A further 330 shut down in August. And 33% said it was due to lack of money to restock, while 20% pointed to the lack of commodities from suppliers. Well, an app called Soko Watch is attempting to deliver a tailor-made digital solution to their doors via a mobile app and a three-wheeled tuk-tuk. At the tap of a button, small shop owners can now source essential goods on their phone and have them delivered to their bustling markets quickly and free of charge. And when cash is low, they can buy goods on credit.
Soko Watch currently works with 15,000 of these informal retailers across 4 different countries: Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda. 9 different cities between them, really focused on these working class, low-income neighborhoods, informal settlements. And within that existing group of 15,000 shops, we estimate that over 1.5 million people depend on those small stores right now to get access to essential goods and services.
Here's how the app works. At the top of the morning, a shopkeeper places his order on his mobile phone via the app, or for those without internet, toll-free text messages. Meanwhile, at this Soko Watch central distribution hub, agents receive the order via the app and load the products on the small and urban-friendly tuk-tuks. Then Soko Watch drivers are off to fulfill the orders, and the process repeats itself until the sun sets on the day.
On the customer end, there's an app where they can see all the products that we have, like the catalog of everything that we have, the products that we have in store. And from there, they can tell anything that is in stock, something that is out of stock, so they can pick from that list what they need for their shops. We have, again, another option of sales team. We have guys in the ground who always pass by the shops during the day, so they can again give their orders to these particular guys who will see to it that they get it.
We decided to follow one of Soko Watch drivers on his delivery routes into one of Nairobi's busiest markets, Kawangware. It is already apparent that several shops here already rely on the app to replenish their supplies daily.
That one improved my...
It's certainly a game changer for Mike, who's run this small store in Kawangware for the last 3 years. Today, he's ordering his goods on credit, which he says has helped manage constraints on his cash flow.
Soko nilipata kwa kutumia
I was introduced to Sokowatch by their agents. They came to my shop and we got to talking and exchanging ideas. Before I met them, I would source my daily stock from wholesalers, which was very difficult because I would have to find some means of transport. If my cargo was heavy, I couldn't transport it myself. I would have had to hire a car. Sokowatch really helped because once I book on the app, they deliver it fast. If I order products today, they give me 7 days before I have to pay, which has improved my bottom line.
For credit, you have to qualify for it, of course. So this depends on historical data on how we have been doing business with you. Normally, it starts maybe with as low as 500 shillings of credit. Then this will continue as we do more and as we understand the trend on how such a shop need goods. We continue adding more and more so that they can get more goods on credit.
Despite the need for more efficiency in Africa's informal retail supply chain, many companies have tried to introduce e-commerce products and failed. They quickly learn that the conditions on the ground in Africa are very different. Well, we asked Sokowatch Kenya CEO Angela Nzioki how they seemingly have bridged the gap between e-commerce services and informal players.
The way we've gone about making sure that retailers are using the app and becoming a little bit more tech savvy is showing them the need as to why they need to be able to move to the app. And I equate it to the success that M-Pesa had. So what Sokowatch has done really, really well is create a credit offering for retail stores where they can get goods on consignment. And majority of them can be able to get that value-added service by really learning how to use some of the apps or some of the technology that we have in place.
Sokowatch didn't just create a smartphone app. It built an inventory management system over time. With at least 3 years of data on retailers' requests, their needs can be predicted based on their past orders. And that has enabled the company to know what goods to source from large manufacturers and then stock them at its distribution hubs daily. Historical transaction data also allows it to structure and integrate credit to its customers better. By negotiating better prices from suppliers, the firm primarily generates revenue by taking a cut off the savings it makes for clients. And with its fleet of urban-friendly tuk-tuks and its geotagging and mapping system, it is also able to deliver goods more efficiently. Now, Sokowatch is not the only tech company in this space. There are a number of tech entrepreneurs who have caught on to the fact that Africa's informal sector, though chaotic, is a huge untapped resource. In fact, it's actually highly connected with complex supply chains containing markets within markets. Now, the key seems to be using technology to create a bridge between all the players.
Did you know a Kenyan-based company called Twiga Foods created a digital platform that is linking farmers and vendors to modern markets in Nairobi city? By buying fresh produce from a network of farmers and delivering it to thousands of informal vendors, it is making the price of produce cheaper and reducing typical post-harvest losses for farmers from 30% to just 4%. Twiga has created a network of 17,000 farmers and 8,000 vendors. Also, Kenyan delivery service Sendi has managed to lower logistics expenses for businesses in Africa by providing a platform for informal motorcycle and car drivers who own their own vehicles to link up with clients who need deliveries. Its app manages payments and creates performance metrics, making it a dependable platform. Its fleet rivals tuk-tuks on reliability, and as a result, it counts FMCGs like Unilever among its clients.
There is ample room for more tech firms to take up space within Africa's informal market. But what is becoming clear is that in order to have staying power, data is king. Sokowatch believes that's where its edge lies. It can become a necessary part of the ecosystem. Leveraging its wealth of data, it can now advise manufacturers and producers who previously did not have visibility as to how their products are doing in specific areas, and that's because of broken down distribution networks. It is using the opportunity to better service FMCG manufacturers with consumer insights and at the same time expand its business offerings. Kenya's CEO Angela says they are the missing piece.
Technically, SoCoach does define itself as a tech and a data company using the data to be able to distribute fast-moving consumer goods to the retail stores. How we went about gathering majority of this data is we did send out food soldiers. We also have our own delivery agents and salespeople that do map out the shops in the communities, or rather in the retail stores that we serve. And then what happens is the stores themselves, either using the SoCoach customer app or our call center or SMS, can be able to place their orders. And over time, we've been able to gather the amount of order history or order data, which has helped us in so many different ways. It's been able to help us improve our credit rating score for some of these retail stores. It's been able to help us better structure our marketing efforts and our product availability efforts to some of the regions that we are working with. And even better yet, it's been able to solve a very big manufacturer problem, which if you look at traditionally how the FMCG space was, manufacturers up the pipe really didn't have availability or visibility of how their products was being distributed into the shops. And this is something that SoCoach has been very instrumental in terms of trying to bridge that gap.
Well, Africa's massive informal sector certainly doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon, but it is slowly changing over time. Tech entrepreneurs are now finding ways to collaborate rather than dominate Africa's informal players, and that can produce a viable return on investment. But of course, it will never be a one-size-fits-all solution.
CGTN's Uche Okoronkwo there with this week's edition of TechSpot. Now then, a quick run through some commodity prices for you. So commodity prices really are essentially in free fall all over today. Brent crude was over 10% lower at 16.13 GMT. In fact, it's actually gone a lot lower than that. Down 11.3% to about $72.93 a barrel. Brent WTI also down almost 13% to $68.46 a barrel at the same time. In fact, that's the first time WTI has been under $70 a barrel since September. Now, considering how big the unknowns are, for the most part, about this recent variant, the Omicron variant as we now know it, there are some in the market who are thinking maybe perhaps this is a bit of an overreaction. But regardless, we'll see how OPEC Plus does treat it in a meeting next week with respect to how this might affect fossil fuel demand. The group also will be having to factor in the coordinated release of some stocks from strategic oil reserves held by some countries. Here's what's coming up next. We'll take a look at Nigeria's RoboDog. It's been designed to address security issues. We'll give it a test run when we come back.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Let's dive into the debate around energy. Fossil fuels may remain around for much longer than the delegates at COP26 might have expected. In fact, at that particular event, delegates failed to agree on how they can be phased out. Now, a move towards greener tech is a tough task for developing nations who are already stretched out by COVID-19. South Africa, which has the highest emissions on the continent, is one of the many nations working towards having a zero carbon economy. But it may take some time and a lot of money, with the country still heavily reliant on coal for the bulk of the electricity consumed there. CGTN's Julie Shire takes a look at a project piloted by Earthlife Africa, which may have some answers.
The smell of freshly cooked food greets learners arriving at the Mpe Tutu Primary School. Daily meals here are prepared on gas stoves, some of which is generated by an eco-friendly biogas digester from kitchen waste.
The peels from vegetables and so on, they are put inside the digester. And overnight, that digester is actually converting all the waste material inside there to gas, to utilize it for cooking. Even if we don't have electricity, we know that the learners will get in classes having eaten something in the morning. Those soups and the basic food that they need to eat.
Learners are taught about recycling and green technologies. Solar panels and skylights are used to light up classrooms, helping prevent disruptions when there's no power.
If we are a child. So they are taught these skills here at the school so that they can also impart that knowledge when they reach their homes. We are living in a very difficult time of where electricity is actually a challenge within the country. So I think if it can be extended to the communities as well, it will really enrich people's lives.
But most South African homes and businesses still depend on coal-generated power. Steps are being taken, however, to build a greener economy, mostly with the help of the private sector.
South Africa is going to have to decommission 22,000 megawatts. That's half of the entire Eskom fleet in the next 15 years. And this is all coal-fired power that is going to have to be decommissioned, not because of climate change, but because they have reached the end of their commercial life. So this represents an ideal opportunity for South Africa to massively decarbonize its economy.
Emissions across the rest of the continent are much lower despite Africa's reliance on coal and oil. But 600 million people still live without power, and infrastructure development needs to be stepped up.
There is this opportunity to leapfrog this old technology and to move directly to distributed power. All the socio-economic requirements of maximizing job creation, minimizing water use, and emitting the least CO2. And it's absolutely clear that the solutions that tick all these boxes come from a blend of wind and solar PV and hydro and pump storage and gas to power and battery energy storage.
Africa is gifted with natural resources which could be key in harnessing renewable energy. The continent is already experiencing higher temperatures and increased natural disasters because of climate change. Failure to adapt quickly could come at a high cost and push millions deeper into poverty. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
In West Africa, Ghanaian innovator Sumaila Ibrahim is helping disabled people in the country with their mobility by building motorbikes that are user-friendly for that particular target market. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra on Grassroots.
Ibrahim Sumaila has been fixing motorbikes for more than a decade. He's now reconstructing bikes for disabled people.
I changed the back tire to 2 tires, and because he cannot use his legs for the brakes and the gear, I changed the gear to the handle. I do a resting platform for the leg to rest on, and I also bring the back brake to the handle.
3% of Ghana's 30 million people have a form of disability, according to government's data. Many have difficulties moving around, which can mean missing out on opportunities, including jobs. Paul Lawe is one of those using Ibrahim's innovations to make life easier.
I use the bike to go to work and also run personal errands. It really helps me move about freely because it's easy to use.
While this disability user-friendly motorbike has proved efficient, it has yet to be licensed, so Ibrahim cannot produce it in commercial quantities.
I know with time and with support, I can go to an extent of going into to check for approval, because already I'm using such motorbikes, and me doing something for a disabled man, I have to cross-check.
Ibrahim also produces other vehicles from scratch. This motorbike is one of his latest inventions.
Ibrahim says he used scraps to build this cart. It took him about a month to get it ready for a road test, and it works on a 10 horsepower engine.
As Ibrahim gets more creative with his innovations, he hopes to build more user-friendly vehicles for the disabled and train other young people in the craft. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
With the help of robotics and some interesting AI, the field of tech is producing some groundbreaking results in Nigeria. Let's take a look at 3 university students who've now designed and built a robotic dog that walks and barks almost as the organic equivalent would when it hears any sound.
It's the latest invention and final year project of these 3 Nigerian students at the Denkule Ejasin University. Meet the black-furred robotic guard dog that is hoped to someday tackle Nigeria's escalating insecurity problem.
One of the major reasons why we opt for this robotic dog is for us to use it to tackle what the nation faces, which is security. With the help of this innovation, the owner of this robotic dog doesn't have to come outside to see why his or her dog is barking before he or she can know why or what is happening at the environment at that particular time.
John and his friends started the theoretical aspect and initial aluminium structure of their project back in 2019, but could not come together due to COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns. They were able to complete it in 2021 after adding sensors, the camera and fast skin to give the robot a more realistic look. When the robotic dog senses a movement or sharp sound, it starts barking. All the owner has to do is to connect their device to the robotic dog and will be able to see everything happening without putting themselves at risk. The owner can also record and take pictures of whatever is happening at that moment.
I may be in my room, and once I hear the sound of the dog barking, I can just connect my device and just want to see the person in front of the robotic dog. I can even take the picture of the person. I can do the video of the person.
Although the security dog can function properly for now, it still has some challenges that may limit its efficiency. Its inventors say the robotic dog needs to be developed further to get it moving, avoid obstacles on its way, recognize its owners and operate in all weather conditions. The cost of parts, all of which have to be imported, also remains a challenge for them.
The actuators inside this dog cannot power it to move, so we are using this to explain the movement to show that we can actually make the dog move in this way.
We want the dog to be more aggressive, and we want it to interact with man, with human being, so that it can be used for defense.
The invention of a robotic dog to fight crimes and insecurity could not have come at a better time for Nigeria. The country is battling an Islamist insurgency in the northeast and a spate of kidnappings for ransom in the north and northwest. And with deployment of inventions like this robotic dog, many are expecting it to play a major role in the road to stability. Najma Abdirizak, CGTN.
All right, then a quick run through currencies to wrap up the program. Now, news, of course, of this new variant, the Omicron variant of COVID, didn't just batter equities and commodity prices, as we saw a little earlier in the hour. The South African rand is the worst hit among the ones that we track here today. So far in November, the currency's fallen by at least 6.1%. Takes its year-to-date loss to around 10% against the American dollar. But that's not quite as bad as the depreciation we saw in 2020. Back then, the dollar-rand rate went over 19 to the dollar. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company over the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.